May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God. For you are our hope. You are our life. You are our Redeemer. Amen. So far, our narratives on the story of Abraham and Sarah have been focused right inside of those first two chapters of their story, chapter 12 and chapter 13, kind of foundational. And now, tonight, we get to some of the stories of Abraham and Sarah living into this promise, living into this relationship, living into this journey that God has sent them on. We need to remember two of the important promises that God gives to them. Abraham and his father before him, and his father before him and his families, they were wanderers. They went from place to place. They tented. They left altars to remember that God had been present to them here and present to them there. And two of the promises that God gives as God sends them to Canaan, this place of promises, promised land. Two promises. One, that God would give to them this land, this space, this place for them in which to dwell. That God would be there and that they would be there together with God. So that's the first promise. That's foundational. And the second promise is a future. So if one is a place, then the other part of that promise is a future. That you will have children and children's children and children's children after that. And they will live inside the same promise that God will extend to generation to generation to generation. So often people live inside the here and now. And we live inside the pressures of the here and now. And it's hard for us to see out. So we're so focused on what's right in front of us, right? So God gives to Abraham and Sarah this promise of a place and a future. So keep in mind those two pieces of promise. A place where God will be with us and a future. That God is out in front of us. That God is leading us into that place and into that time. And we're going to hear about the stars as a sign of the promise. If you could count the stars, that's how many your descendants will be. A space in the future. Lord, prepare to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. So there's this thing, there's this thing, it's a real thing, we call it peer pressure. You know that, right? You know what that's about. Peer pressure, it can make you do things that you would imagine you would do. Peer pressure can make us into something that we were not. Yes? Yes. Into something that for someone that we don't want to be, that we would have never imagined ourselves to be, and yet here we are, being that, because others are pressuring us. I've been listening to people. I asked, what does peer pressure do to you? And one person said, well, I actually participated in demeaning a person that I have known all my life because the people I was with were tearing them down, and I did it too. I claimed accomplishments that I actually didn't do because I thought they would want to believe that about me. One person said that they had never really lied to their parents. It wasn't something that they ever felt they needed to do. But they felt like those around them did, and so they started. Didn't even need to lie, and they did. So we do stuff that isn't really our true selves. All because we feel this pressure from outside to fit in, or this pressure to be valued, this pressure to be liked, this pressure not to be different than the people who are around us. Everyone has a story about peer pressure, yeah? Yeah. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 5 minutes. And you get 2.5 minutes each. Just turn to someone you're sitting next to, and you tell them a 2.5-minute story of peer pressure and what it has done to make you someone else. And then let them tell you for 2.5 minutes their story. Go.
your freedom in the fire, 'cause freedom is a liar.
So, Abraham and Sarah, they trust God, right? They trust God, and God counts it as, God counts it as what? Righteousness. Yeah. So this is what God intends for us, is to live our lives trusting in what God says about us. The value that God places on us. The value and the worth that God has mixed into us as God has shaped us and then blown the breath of life into us. When God says, go, I will show you, they trust and they travel along together with those that are around them, with the community that was created by this trust. When God says to them, I will bless you, and I will bless the people who bless you, they thought, cool. And when God said, and I will curse those who curse you, and I will come down heavy on those people, I suppose they said, that's cool. But in the midst of their trusting and their traveling, there were times and there were circumstances that Abraham and Sarah couldn't trust God. The cause of this distrust, right? This cause of sort of falling out of that connection that God had made with them. I would like to think it was inside fear and outside pressure. Inside fear and outside pressure. Listen, I need my helpers. Listen to this story of Abram and Sarah. The 12th chapter, toward the end. Now there was a famine in the land, and so Abraham went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, a foreigner. For the famine was severe in the land of Canaan. When he was about to enter into Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah,
I know well.
Just talk.
I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. And then they will kill you. But they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that it may go well with you, because of you. And that my life may be spared on your account.
So when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman, Sarah, was very beautiful. And when the officials of the Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to the Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, into Pharaoh's harem. And for her sake, the Pharaoh dealt well with Abraham, and he had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male and female slaves and female donkeys and camels. Abraham prospered because the Pharaoh had Sarah in his harem. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So Pharaoh called Abraham and said,
what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and be gone.
And the Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning Abraham, and they set him on the way with his wife and all that he had. This is the word of the Lord. This is a messed up story. Yeah? This is a messed up story. The famine in the land of Canaan causes Abraham and Sarah to travel south to a place that has food and water. But the closer they get to this place, the more nervous Abraham gets. What will they think of me, he wonders, right? What are they going to do to me because my wife, Sarah, is so beautiful? So he conceives this fitting in strategy that is really a deception, right? Let's say you're my sister. To which Sarah says, okay, sounds like it can work. What? So I'm thinking, where did this come from? Where did this idea that he had to preserve himself, where did that come from? Outside or inside? Inside. So it's an inside fear made each of them think this was a good idea. But then, look where Sarah ends up. Sarah ends up in the Pharaoh's harem. In the Pharaoh's collection of beautiful women. Hashtag, oh no, hashtag, not me too. Sure, Abraham is safe. Abraham's fine. Abraham has donkeys and camels, slaves, and all kinds of possessions. Sounds pretty good. But what about Sarah? I mean, Abraham is supposed to be the father of generation after generation of generation, so that God intends to pass blessing on down through the times. But let's remember that Sarah is supposed to be the mother of all those generations. What's going on? How's that supposed to work if she's in someone else's house? This is not a good rest stop. This is definitely a dead stop. So don't you wonder what happened exactly to depending on God for the future? What happened to depending and trusting on the promise that God has made to them? What happened to faith as God intended it? I would call this not Zedek. So this is the thing about the people that we read about in the Bible, right? No one's perfect. No one completely trusts the Lord as the Lord intends. Not even Abraham, who is seen to be this prime example of trusting in God. Even he gives into that fear. Even he gives into that anxiousness. Even he tries to control the way things are going to be. So for a time in Egypt, Abraham lost his hold on the promise of God. For a time, he lost track of himself. And worst of all, he lost track of his wife. Let me tell you, it's never good to lose track of your spouse. I have done it. We're not even going into that story. That's just too painful to tell. Hashtag not a good thing. But it's what happens to all of us, right? When we're under that external pressure. And we can lose ourselves. We can forget our own deep down identity. Our values disappear. It happens. It happens. But here's the good news, my brothers and sisters. Here's the good news. Even when we lose track of the promises of God, even when we lose track of ourselves, God never loses track of us. Yes? Yes. Say it. God never loses track of us. Hashtag God is the faithful one. Everybody. Hashtag God is the faithful one. Yeah. So here's the thing about peer pressure. I think it starts with inner fear. It doesn't start with the outside pressure. Seems to me, even though there is pressure, the fear is what makes us act crazy. And actually, everything starts inside. We're afraid of what others will say. And so we give them power over our lives. We give them power over our decisions. We give them control over something that they shouldn't have any control over, right? We're afraid, we're anxious, we're uncertain, and we give over ourselves. I remember one night, here at Augustana College, my very first year, I was a freshman in this place. It was a time when I was working pretty hard to fit in, yeah? And it made me sort of a chameleon. I kind of took on the look of what was around me. I started to look like my surroundings. One evening, I was hanging out on campus with a group of my friends. Actually, we were up at Westerland in the lounge, right by what at the time was the main desk. And I was hanging out with these friends of mine who were smoking. And since they smoked and they offered me a cigarette, I took it. Now you have to know that I had never in my life smoked. Never felt like I wanted to, never felt like I needed to, right? And I had no intention whatsoever before that moment, that instant, that would you like a cigarette? Never had an intention to stop. So let's ask, was the pressure from outside or was it from inside? Now, you need to know something. My brother, his name is Lance. My brother's name is Lance, and he was 1 year ahead of me here at Augustana College. Football player. I'm tall, skinny, he's short. Not skinny. Not fat. All muscle. Well, it was at that moment, as I was taking my first draw on a cigarette, that he walked by and he saw me. And I saw him seeing me. And his eyes flashed. Because you see, he recognized what I was doing, what I was trying to be. And he knew it was more than about smoking the cigarette. Way more. I looked at him, and inside of my eyes, there was sentences going on. Let this go. Walk on by. Pretend you didn't see this. Really? We'll talk about this later. Okay? I think that this moment was kind of a test. Yeah? It was a test, which I failed and which my brother passed. See, I was failing the test of being my best self. I was failing the test of being my honest self. I was failing the test of being me in this place. I was swayed by this internal fear and that external pressure. And at the same time, my brother was passing the test of being a faithful brother. He walked over to me pretty directly, reached down and took the cigarette out of my mouth, broke it in half, dropped it on the floor, leaned down right next to my face and said, I never want to see this ever again. Stood up and walked out of the lobby. You see, he did that because he knew who I was. He knew who I am. And he was faithful in our relationship. Remember last night when I talked about having an honesty partner? Well, he's one of them in my life. Still is. He was being faithful to our relationship. He was being Zedek, righteous. Not self-righteous. He was being true to this relationship as God intends us to have relationships. Hashtag faithful in relationship is righteousness. That's a long one. Everybody say that. Faithful in relationship is righteousness. Of course, I acted all indignant. I acted all, like up in arms. And I embarrassed him in front of my friends as he walked out of the lobby. I ridiculed him as he walked out. He had been the faithful one. While I was twisting myself, adapting myself, changing myself to go with the situation. That's what internal fear and external pressure does. Or at least that's what it did to me. It led to a deception. We deceive others and we deceive ourselves. And I think that's why one of the reasons why this story of Abraham and Sarah is being told. Right? It's because this is exactly what Abraham did. The closer he got to Egypt, the more anxious he became. And the anxiousness and the fear was all on the inside of him, right? He had no idea who the Pharaoh is, right? He had no idea. All of that anxiety and fear was going on from the inside of him. He's thinking about, how do I preserve myself? How do I control this promise of God? So he was not thinking about God. He was not thinking about his faithful self, his authentic self, his real self, his God-blessed self. And maybe what was worse, he wasn't thinking about the impact that this choice and decision was going to have on other people, particularly upon Sarah and also upon the Pharaoh. I mean, let's remember who got the bad end of this stick. The Pharaoh. Hashtag, it's not all about you, Abraham. Everybody? So it's fear that does this. It's the desire to fit in. And he's afraid that Sarah will stand out so much and he's going to get put out. Which begs the question. How do you and I, as God's people, respond to the fear that's inside of us? And to the pressure that's always all around us? And what resource does God provide to us? And I would say that this is all about identity. This is all about identity. God's identity and our identity. In Psalm 46, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." Everyone, be still and know that I am God. What if when we are feeling that inside fear, when it's bubbling up on us, and we know, I'm getting so anxious here. What if, when we're feeling that outside pressure from a peer or from a group of peers or from that situation and that circumstance, what if we just took a step back for just a minute? Right? What if we slowed down the whole process? And what if we quieted ourselves and centered ourselves not on what was going on around us or not what was bubbling up inside of us, but centered ourselves on the one who defines us, the one who has created us, the one who has named us. Be still, says God. Well, I tell you what, that's one of the things that I have trouble with. Have you noticed? Right? I am never still. I go 90 miles an hour, right up until the point that I lay down in bed and I'm asleep. That's me. So it's tough for me to be still. It's a challenge for me to remember, right? Who is God in my life? Storms are raging around you. The storms are raging inside of you. And God says, be still. And know that I am God. In the New Testament, there's an encouragement that comes to us from, of all people, St. Peter. You remember St. Peter. That's a guy who went at 170 miles an hour. Right? He says in the 4th chapter of his first letter, cast all your fears on God because God cares for you. Cast all your fears on God because God cares for you. Now this is a big deal. This is important for us to hear. Let's think about Peter for just a second. Peter was quick to follow, yeah? Quick to follow. Peter was quick to call Jesus the Messiah. You're the chosen one of God. Right, says Jesus. He was quick to do everything. But he was also quick to cave in under pressure. Right? Quick to confess Jesus and quick to deny Jesus. Right? He's outside of the place where Jesus is being tried, the high priest's house. Out in that courtyard, and people start saying, you're one of them. You're one of Jesus' guys, right? He goes, I don't know the man. I don't know the man. God damn me, I don't know the man. That's the part. The third one is, it says he cursed himself in his denial. I don't know who that guy is. He failed the test. The internal fear and the external pressure caved Peter in. Some kind of rock he was, huh? We call him like the head of the body of Christ earlier. The prime disciple. What's that all about? But let's think about it. Let's get to the resurrection. Jesus crucified, died, buried. 1 day, 2 days, 3rd day, raised from the dead. And Jesus shows Peter how faithful God really is. One of the best messages on that Easter, the angel tells the women, check it out. Go tell the disciples and Peter. And Peter that he is risen and he's going on ahead. How about that for some news? The guy who had cursed himself by denial has specifically his name mentioned. Tell him. That's how faithful God is. While you are failing the test, God is faithful. Always. Hashtag God is faithful.
God is faithful.
Yeah, see, that's how that was supposed to go. Hashtag God is faithful. Cast all your fears on God, for the Lord cares for you. St. Paul writes to the Corinthians, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to everyone. I'm sorry to tell you that all the things that you have going on in your life, all those things that feel like outside pressure, are nothing unique. Get over yourself. Amen. Right? What you are feeling, everybody feels, right? What is pressuring you to be something other than what you are, we all got, right? Who doesn't have a temptation to give in to temptation? Who doesn't have a temptation to be something else when your friends are wanting you to be that, right? Who doesn't have fear inside you? Nobody, right? Get over yourself. We're all being tempted. It's not harder on you than it is on anybody else. Yes? Well, maybe you don't believe that, but I'm just telling you it's true. Even your pastors are struggling. Even the people you think are deeply spiritual, they're wrestling too. The outside of us might look calm, but the inside of us is going like this. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to everyone. And then Paul says, God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, this is a great line, when you are tempted, God will provide you a way out so that you can endure it. God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. Throughout this entire episode in Egypt, God is the faithful one. So finally, Abraham is called back from his deception. Sarah is liberated from the harem, and God puts them both back on the road toward the fulfillment of the promise. And this assurance that comes again and again and again and again and again in the Bible. I am with you. I am with you. I am with you always. Always. Isn't that the promise that's everywhere in the Bible? Has a name in the New Testament. Emmanuel. God knows we're going to get off track. Fear inside and pressure from the outside is real for everyone. But it doesn't stop when you reach some magical age or get to a certain place in school. Pressure from the outside and fear on the inside. Man, that fear can be strong, but guess what? The song's right. Fear is a liar. That pressure doesn't have to twist us. So what's the alternative? What's the alternative to the deception that follows that fear and that pressure? Peter reminds us and encourages us to cast all our troubles, cast all our fears on the one who promises, I am with you. To the one who stands beside us and goes along with us, the one who leads us step by step, step by step, stage by stage. The one who put the stars in the heavens and says to Abraham, all those will be your descendants. And by the way, you're one of the stars that Abraham saw. Yeah, we will fail. And we will fall to the pressure. Yes, others will be impacted by our deceptions and the choices that we make when we try to control the promise that comes from God. But God is ever faithful. God is ever faithful. God is ever faithful. He will turn us around and put us back on track. And I have found that usually God does that turning around and that reorienting through the faithful ones that have been put into my life, like my brother. And like so many others, many of you are here and you know who you are, who have always been right here and sometimes right here. God bless the ones who are willing to go right here and get in our face and tell us honestly who we really are. The ones who recognize that God-blessed person that we are, that God-called person that we are, that God-forgiven and made new person that we are. God bless them. And I thank God when God sends someone into that moment, when my choices are leading me to some other place. Trust God. Trust God when you're in the fire. Trust God when you're feeling the pressure. Trust God when that fear is sort of bubbling up inside of you. Trust God because maybe that's really the reason why we're here. That's why we're here this week. That's why we're here right now. To be reminded, first of all, of who we are. To be reminded of who we are, whose we are, and then be connected with people who share the same identity, who are willing to stand up and be unashamed to say, God is my God, Jesus is my Savior, and you are my brother, you are my sister. We're family together. Yeah. So that in the future, we will be more able to be who we are. Always who we are. Always who God intended us to be. Fear is a liar. fear is a liar. Because you see, God is always faithful. And God's word about us, that's the true word. That's the true word. May the peace of God that passes all human understanding keep your hearts, your minds, and your whole selves in Christ Jesus.